Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Brian Liddy and it's Monday the 28th of July, and this evening we're joined by William Duguid. Good evening, William. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thank you very much on this relatively fine evening. Looking out. Hope you are too.
Yes, thank you. We are. Here is the Middle East update. Our traditional Middle East update. At least 59,921 Palestinians have been killed and 145,233 people have been injured in Gaza since the 7th of October 2023. That's according to the Gaza Health Authority. At least 100 Palestinian people were killed and 382 others were injured in the last 24 hours alone, the ministry said. This is despite the Israeli military pause in parts of the Gaza Strip. In an update this morning, Gaza's health ministry said hospitals in Gaza recorded 14 new deaths in the past 24 hours due to famine and malnutrition. This brings the total number of deaths due to malnutrition to 147, including 88 children, since the start of the war in 2023. Israeli strikes killed at least 36 Palestinians across the Gaza Strip on Monday, including a pregnant woman and her newborn, local health officials said. Israel, meanwhile, eased some aid restrictions as it came under mounting pressure over the spiralling hunger crisis in the war-ravaged territory. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres today said Israel's creeping annexation of the West Bank is illegal and the wholesale destruction of the Gaza Strip is intolerable and both must stop. Let's be clear, the creeping annexation of the occupied West Bank is illegal. It must stop. The wholesale destruction of Gaza is intolerable. It must stop, he told a conference at the UN on a two-state solution between Israel and the Palestinians. US President Donald Trump said the US and others are giving money and food to Gaza and that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has got to sort of run it, adding, I want him to make sure they get the food. I want to make sure they get the food. Keir Starmer has said that Gaza is facing an absolute catastrophe. Speaking at Turnberry ahead of his talks with Donald Trump, the Prime Minister said, it's a humanitarian crisis, it's an absolute catastrophe. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has called on Donald Trump to help stop Israel's war on Gaza and deliver humanitarian aid to the Strip's desperate population. In a televised speech, he said that Trump is the one who is able to stop the war, deliver the aid and end this suffering. Two leading human rights organisations based in Israel, B'Tselem and Physicians for Human Rights, say Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza and the country's Western allies have a legal and moral duty to stop it. In reports published on Monday, the two groups said Israel had targeted civilians in Gaza only because of their identity as Palestinians over nearly 2 years of war, causing severe and, in some cases, irreparable damage to Palestinian society. William, I hate to ask, but I've asked you so many times already, but what do you make of today's update?
Well, the discussion between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump was interesting. The bits that I saw of it, I do think, though, it's a case of getting Trump really to focus on what is actually going on, which he did seem to be doing towards the end of the discussion. There was an initial meeting in front of the cameras where Keir Starmer's body language was frankly dreadful. He had his arms folded and clearly he had been banging his head against a brick wall to an extent. I do think that the penny has already now dropped with the UK government and they're edging gradually towards what they absolutely need to do, maybe to put pressure on Israel to stop what's going on. But the question is, will it be enough? Will it be enough without Trump also getting involved? And will it be enough even if Trump does get involved? Because this looks increasingly like a project for Israel of clearing out the Gaza Strip absolutely and utterly, and also a feeling of impunity about anything they do to bring that about. And to a certain extent, the end result is already baked in, because once you're into starvation, things tend to go off a cliff. And the population just doesn't recover easily from starvation. It's not just a case of here's some food and you'll be all right from now on. It's a long, slow process. You can't overfeed people who are suffering from malnutrition. You need to reintroduce food and monitor them very carefully. How is that going to happen in what is still a war zone? And that's why a ceasefire, at the very least, is needed. Not just a partial ceasefire, as Israel has declared, which is nothing like enough and enables them just to go on with the destruction at other times. This conflict, if it is a conflict, that's really not the right word for it, this slaughter has to end because people need to heal. And there just needs to be peace for a while. Without that, anything now that anybody in the international community does is not going to work because we're too far down the road. And it's a stain of shame on the international community that we've got this far. And we're still hearing commentators in the mainstream media saying there is no starvation, Hamas is just stealing food. And it's nonsense. This was not happening when UNRWA were distributing aid. It was still not the right amount of aid, not the amount of aid that's needed, but it was not happening. And that's one of the reasons UNRWA had to be got rid of, because now Israel has control of aid. All that other countries seem to be able to do is airdrops, which I guarantee you are the worst possible means of distribution of aid. Even the boat which tried to deliver aid by sea was turned back. So we need movement from Israel here. We need some contrition from Israel. I am heartened to see the statements of B'Tselem and Physicians for Human Rights in Israel. I was aware of B'Tselem's work within Israel in support of the Palestinian cause and the two-state solution. Whether they have any influence that will actually make the government do something different, I don't know, because the fundamental thing here is Benjamin Netanyahu's political survival at this point depends on the slaughter continuing, on the conflict, if you want to call it that, continuing. And until that balance changes, I don't think it's going to stop. So it's some good stuff has happened today, but I'm not overly optimistic.
Thank you, William. I think the word slaughter is quite fitting there. Starmer's speech the other day seems to have been, people seem to say that it was just wishy-washy, but time's against us. So today's Ukraine update. Donald Trump has said he will shorten the deadline he gave to Vladimir Putin to reach a deal to end the war in Ukraine, giving Russia 10 or 12 days to move. In a clear attempt to apply more pressure, the US president said he had wanted to be generous with his original 50-day deadline, but that with no progress being made, there was no reason to keep waiting. A Russian air attack on Kyiv overnight wounded 8 residents of an apartment building, including a 3-year-old child, authorities in the Ukrainian capital said on Monday. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said all the people were residents of a multi-storey apartment building in the city's Donetsk region. The capital and most of Ukraine were under air raid alerts for several hours overnight. Ursula von der Leyen has called on Sunday for Volodymyr Zelensky to uphold independent anti-corruption bodies, with the Ukrainian president signalling legislation to that effect could be adopted within days. Ukraine has already achieved a lot on its European path, von der Leyen said on X after a call with Zelensky. It must build on these solid foundations and preserve independent anti-corruption bodies, which are cornerstones of Ukraine's rule of law. After a rare outburst of public criticism, Zelensky on Thursday submitted draft legislation to restore the independence of Ukraine's anti-corruption agencies, reversing course on an earlier bill aimed at stripping their autonomy. Von der Leyen also promised continued support for Ukraine on its path to EU membership. Russia scaled down festivities honouring its navy on Sunday, citing security concerns amid continuing Ukrainian drone attacks. Russian authorities cancelled the parades of warships in St. Petersburg, in the Kaliningrad region of the Baltic, and in the far eastern port of Vladivostok that are usually held to mark the annual Navy Day celebrations. On the trip to St. Petersburg, Putin vowed to build more warships and intensify the Navy's training, adding, "The Navy's strike power and combat capability will rise to a qualitatively new level." French President Emmanuel Macron had a phone call with Zelensky on Sunday and said later on X that he reaffirmed France's support for Kyiv and vowed to raise pressure on Moscow to force it to agree to a ceasefire that paves the way for talks leading to a solid and lasting peace with full European involvement. William, again, I suppose that's quite a straightforward update today, especially compared to the Middle Eastern update. What's your thoughts?
Well, again, yes, we do need a ceasefire, and we need to work out where things go next, because we certainly need security guarantees for Ukraine, and to a certain extent, we need to tread quite carefully about things like NATO expansion, which might indirectly or directly involve Ukraine. Possibly even be a bit careful about how we tread with the EU, because Russia needs its own security guarantees, I suspect, as well. And this is a slightly complex situation. We don't actually know what Putin's long-term game plan is. There is a case for saying he wants to go further in Europe, but we don't absolutely know for sure. But until we get some proper negotiations going and stick at it, we're not going to find out. So I think that's the most important thing. Donald Trump, again, the 50-day deadline has now become a 10 or 12-day deadline. I'm not convinced that Trump has all that much influence in Putin. I think Putin by now has long ago thought that he's got him wrapped around his little finger. And what would Donald Trump's strategy be should Putin tell him to take a running jump? Sanctions. Well, there are plenty of sanctions in place now, and more tariffs. Well, what on? Fertilizers are the biggest one that the US imports from Russia, and about 18% of their fertilizers come from there. If tariffs were imposed on Russia, that means that those fertilizers would become more expensive for American farmers. And effectively, America would, in this case, probably be shooting itself slightly in the foot. In fact, trade has fallen away a big time since the war began, and certainly since really the high point some 5 or 10 years ago. So the threats from Trump, which is the only negotiating tactic he often seems to have, aren't going to really make much difference. So I think Putin will go his sweet way, and I don't know what we do about it. I think we just try and increase the pressure on him, but also just think about what might he accept at the moment, just to stop and think about where this goes next. And that might involve going even further afield. I mean, I am no foreign policy expert, but should we not be even thinking in terms of talking to China about this and the other big powers, certainly powers within BRICS, to say, how can we stop this? This has the capacity to escalate into a third world war, more so than the struggle in Gaza, which is serious enough in its own way. But the absolute thing we need to do in this planet is cool down the regions that are problematic and disturbed. And this is certainly the foremost.
Thank you, William. So the First Minister, John Swinney, is expected to raise global humanitarian concerns, including conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine, during a meeting with US President Donald Trump this week in Scotland. Mr. Swinney said the visit offers an opportunity to speak directly to the US President on matters that resonate strongly with people in Scotland. He intends to focus on the need for urgent action to end international conflicts and to support peace efforts. Particular attention is expected to be given to the situation in Gaza and the war in Ukraine, both of which have caused widespread human suffering. The First Minister has stated that he hopes the discussion will contribute to broader international efforts to reduce conflict and promote peace. The meeting comes amid continued protests in Scotland against President Trump's visit, including a demonstration in Balmedy near his mini golf course in Aberdeenshire. Organised by the Stop Trump coalition, the event attracted around 100 people and included speeches from campaigners representing disability rights, anti-nuclear groups and local activism. Organisers said they had received numerous messages of support from US citizens following similar protests held in Edinburgh and Aberdeen. They described the demonstrations as acts of solidarity with vulnerable communities and causes including Palestinian civilians and migrants in the United States. Meanwhile, President Trump declined to comment to removing US tariffs on Scotch whisky, stating only that he held Scotland in high regard. He also avoided offering a clear position on Scottish independence, saying countries may need to wait between referendums, and added that he did not know John Swinney personally, but had heard positive remarks. In a separate development, Mr Swinney wrote in the Daily Record that a majority of SNP seats at the next Holyrood election would represent a mandate for a second independence referendum. He said the SNP will set out radical policies aimed at demonstrating what could be achieved through independence and has submitted a motion to the party conference to formalise that goal. So, William, two parts to that news item. Do you think we were on the Full Scottish on Sunday, and the topic was, will any good come from Trump's visit in Scotland? I mean, this is supposed to be a personal trip, and yet we've had the Prime Minister and the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, in Scotland, and now the First Minister is going to meet Trump. What kind of outcomes do you expect to see or hope to see?
Well, you can never be quite sure with Trump when the good effects will kick in. He seems to have reached an agreement with Ursula von der Leyen. He seems to be gradually getting won round by Keir Starmer to the very things, many of which John Swinney will be speaking to him about tomorrow. But somebody else will maybe whispering in his ear within a short time as soon as he gets back to the States, and who knows where it then goes. With Trump, a lot of it is bluster. And there is always this feeling that people are pandering to him. And, they have to because of his position. And, in what, as far as we know, was a fair election, the people of the US voted him in as their president. And we do need to respect that. I mean, some people have said, why is John Swinney even bothering to meet Donald Trump? But as effectively his host, and, if we have aspirations for independence, it's actually quite good that Trump's car can display the Saltire instead of the Union Jack when it's in Scotland, and that at least he doesn't crush the very idea of independence in whatever he's talking about at the minute. So I'm not sure that there is anything tangible that we'll get out of particularly John Swinney's conversation with him tomorrow, but it's something that has to happen. And hopefully it's not going to be simple, buttering him up. Hopefully John will get some points that he puts across and they'll be listened to. And of course, the one thing I wasn't sure about was the funding of the golf tournament at Trump's golf course. I didn't see the point in that particularly, but perhaps that's just me, but it may not be just me. Operating in the world as an independent country is going to mean a lot of diplomatic skills are required, and we had best be practicing them as a nation now. So that's how I see this in any event. So don't know if it's going to be things we can hang our hats on, but at least it's something.
Thank you, William. Yeah, I think a lot of people are asking, surely Donald Trump is wealthy enough to be able to do without a donation from the Scottish Government. But what about the First Minister's plans for the second independence referendum? Trump, when he was asked about that, he said he didn't want to get involved in Scottish politics, but he did take time to remind us that he called it right the last time there was an independence referendum. He said, and also he said that he thought there was something that a restriction, he called it, of between 50 to 75 years between referendums. So I also said because, a country can't go through that too much. Do you think it would be too much to put us through another referendum?
Trump says a lot of things that he thinks are right that are absolute rubbish. There is no restriction. He said a lot about wind turbines today, much of which was absolute rubbish. And as for being put through that again, we're being put through it now because the independence referendum of 2014 didn't end particularly satisfactorily, but also the basis on which it was going forward, which was the Smith Commission, and of course the warning that we might be plucked out of the European Union if we became independent. Brexit turned that on its head. That was a game changer. And there should be no restriction on a sovereign people to make its own mind about what it wants to do. And okay, the independence movement has a lot of work to do to really build and sustain the sort of support that's going to take it through a referendum, but we need to get to work on that right now. And there should be absolutely no time limitation at all. As to how it will work out with John Swinney's plan, there seemed to be, in some of the things he said, some ground being given on what people might want to do with their second vote. That would tend to contradict a previous statement of John Swinney's, which was that SNP 1 and 2 was the answer, which for many people it isn't. And I suspect that the electorate will take that out of his hands anyway. The important thing for me in 2026 is that independent supporters should be sure to vote, and if you possibly can, either on the list or in the constituency or both, to vote for a pro-independence party so as to maximise the number of pro-independence MSPs. We know from at least one, probably two previous elections, that just ain't enough on its own. The SNP, I think, has to be fairly clear when it gets to its conference about what happens next and how we get to a decision of the Scottish people to become independent, whether that be a referendum, whether that be something else. And it needs to be something that the whole of the independence movement can get behind. There's a long way to go until we get to that. And I think that the 2026 election may be quite messy. But we won't know for sure until we see how the SNP conference goes, what motions go to that, what sort of discussion they have, and crucially, what the membership as it stands at that point thinks about it, and whether it's something that the independence movement can get behind. I have to say, when I helped to found the Perth hub, the S Hub in 2019, I did not expect to be in this situation nearly 6 years later with no real immediate prospect of progress. So all of us, the politicians and the movement, have to work out, how do we take this forward now? What have we not been doing that we need to do to take it forward? How do we actually get overwhelming popular support that's demonstrable, and bring the project to where it needs to go? Because truly, it is, to my mind, the only way properly to deal with so many of the problems that Scotland has got. We need to be able to look after our own affairs. It will improve our relations with the rest of the UK, and it will improve our relations with the rest of the world, and it may just make us a far, far better place.
Thank you, William. And you mentioned Brexit. I must admit, I would like to have been a fly on the wall when Ursula von der Leyen was meeting with the First Minister, because I'm sure that Brexit and independence would both have rated high on whatever they were chatting about. But we have to move on. And Anas Sarwar is facing calls to explain why he did not sign a letter from Scottish Labour MSPs urging the UK Prime Minister to recognise Palestinian statehood amid growing pressure on Labour over the issue. 21 Scottish Labour MSPs have signed a letter calling for the UK government to immediately recognise the state of Palestine, aligning with over 200 MPs across parties who have issued similar demands. However, Sarwar, who last week voiced support for Palestinian statehood, has not put his name to the MSP's letter. The SNP has questioned Sarwar's position, asking whether he will now instruct Labour MPs to support an expected motion at Westminster in favour of a two-state solution. The SNP has also announced plans to bring forward a Palestine recognition bill when the UK Parliament returns from summer recess, aiming to secure a vote unless the UK government acts first. Sir Keir Starmer has come under increasing pressure from within his own party over the issue. Senior Labour figures voiced frustration at what they see as a lack of urgency in recognising Palestinian statehood, especially as other countries move in that direction. The matter has become more prominent amid international criticism of Israel's military actions in Gaza, with recognition of Palestinian statehood viewed by some as a diplomatic step towards progress in the Middle East. The Scottish Government has stated that it supports a two-state solution and recognition of Palestine. William, perhaps like me, I read a piece in the national newspaper 3 days ago, and the headline was Anas Sarwar backs immediate recognition of Palestinian state. So he seemed more progressive than Starmer on that. Starmer gave a speech a couple of days later, just the other day, where he was panned for saying, yes, we do need a two-state. We do need to recognise Palestine as an official state if we're going to have a two-state solution, but not yet. So do you think maybe Sarwar's been told to roll back on this a wee bit?
I don't know. Basically, what he hasn't done is sign a letter that was composed towards the end of last week. So it's possible that he just hasn't signed it yet because he had other things he had to be doing. I'm not in any great doubt that his views on the whole situation, as expressed on social media just 3 days ago, are probably slightly in advance of Keir Starmer's. Perhaps his position as the branch office leader may make it slightly awkward to him, although not for Jackie Bailey. He doesn't want to be seen to be putting pressure on Starmer. I don't know, but I really don't seriously doubt Sarwar's views on this, and I think actually it's verging on mischief making to be making too much of it. I mean, by the same token, you could say there's now through Kevin Stewart MSP, there's a motion in the Scottish Parliament to urge the UK government to recognise the Palestinian state, and so far only 13 MSPs have signed it. So what about all the others? Well, they've got another month to do it, to be fair, or nearly another month. And I think with all of those things, it's maybe better to take a step back and let things take their course. I do hope that in their conversations with each other, Starmer and David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, whose ultimate job it is to recognise states. It's not actually for the UK Parliament. UK Parliament can vote on it, but it's not a binding vote. It's actually the discretion of the Foreign Secretary, presumably having talked to his boss, which states get recognised. And I do hope that there is now sufficient impetus for those discussions to be productive. And if that happens, it doesn't really matter who signed what and when, as long as we know what side people were on at the time. So that's a somewhat bland view of it, I suppose, but there we are. Got to be bland about something, haven't we?
Well, maybe it's because it's politics. I don't know, or maybe it's because it's Anas Sarwar. Anyway, that's not bland. Thank you, William. A group of leading international economists has urged UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer and Chancellor Rachel Reeves to begin preparing for a new wealth tax in this autumn's budget. More than 24 economists, including Thomas Piketty, Jayati Ghosh and Hajun Chang, say that growing inequality in Britain requires action to tax high levels of personal wealth. They argue that a modest levy on assets worth over £10 million could raise significant revenue and reduce reliance on austerity to close gaps in public finances. The group estimates that such a tax could raise up to £22 billion annually, while affecting only a small portion of the population. The letter, coordinated by the campaign group Tax Justice UK, encourages the UK government to launch a formal consultation this year to explore how such a tax could be introduced before the end of the current Parliament. Economists claim this would allow for careful design and administrative planning, with international cooperation to reduce tax avoidance. However, several UK cabinet ministers are reportedly sceptical. Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds recently dismissed the idea as unworkable, while sources suggest the Treasury favours using existing taxes on capital gains, pensions and inheritance rather than creating a new mechanism. Critics, including the Institute for Fiscal Studies, warn that a wealth tax could be difficult to enforce and may lead to capital flight. They also argue that better enforcement of current taxes on income and assets would be more effective. Wealth taxes are used in some European countries such as Spain and Norway, but have been phased out in others including Germany and Denmark. While the Scottish Government controls income tax and other devolved fiscal powers, the introduction of a wealth tax is a reserved matter, requiring action from the UK Government. So, William, there's other prominent economists who are also in favour of a wealth tax. I'm assuming that they're not part of that group. Richard Murphy, for one, has got a high profile here in Scotland. A new kid on the block is Gary Stevenson. He's an ex-banker, describes himself as wealthy, and he's been making a lot of progress on the issue on his YouTube channel. He's often saying, look, I'm rich, tax me. I want you to tax me. I can afford it. Do it. You might have seen him recently on BBC Question Time when he came up with the mantra, tax the wealthy, not the workers. But I suppose the question is, why won't this Labour government tax the wealthy? Isn't that what Labour governments are supposed to do traditionally?
Well, this Labour government does a lot of things that traditional Labour governments don't do. Although, what you mean by traditional Labour government, because Tony Blair's wasn't a particularly traditional one either. So maybe you have to go back to Harold Wilson and Jim Callaghan to get even a sniff of traditional Labourism. I think we definitely need to redistribute wealth from the very rich back to the less well off. There has been a programme over the last 40 plus years of steady, in fact, accelerating, I would suggest, redistribution of wealth from the poor to the rich. And some reversal is definitely called for. The question, I think, for me would be, is a wealth tax the best mechanism to do that? And I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to argue with the likes of Richard Murphy or indeed Thomas Piketty on this. But a wealth tax is not without its difficulties. It would be a new structure. It would probably have anomalies because you have assets and then you have liquid assets. You might have some perverse outcomes. And overall, there is a good case for using the existing tax structures and building on those and making them more redistributive in the way that we want, than to go to all the palaver of working out a wealth tax and then chiseling away with it as it makes its way through Parliament and then it doesn't quite do what you thought it was going to do. So a one-off wealth tax for a particular thing, maybe, just maybe. You still have to value the assets, etc., and there would be incentives to hide them all over the place, which might not work. And of course, if you're going to go with the existing structure, maybe you have to reform the existing structure as well, because there are simply too many loopholes now. We need a tax system, and I hope particularly when Scotland becomes independent that it doesn't make a mistake with its tax system and it keeps its tax code simple. Cut down the loopholes, make it equitable, make it fair, make it payable, and make sure that whatever people are asked to pay, they are able to afford to pay. And that would certainly, into that category, would fall income tax, would also fall capital gains tax, and indeed inheritance tax. So I have some sympathy for the people that don't think a wealth tax is a good idea because it's complicated. And I'm not entirely convinced about this UK government's ability to do complicated things.
Thank you, William. We're out of time on this, but you didn't mention a threshold. So say I had £12 million in the bank. The first 10 million would escape any wealth tax. I'd only get taxed on the 2 million that's over. So I could probably afford that, couldn't I?
Yes, you probably could. I would. It would be a bit of a stretch to say just send us the money. You'd have to build the structure to do it. You'd have to value your assets, and you might not be the anomalous one. You might be one of the many people for whom it's not an anomaly. Whereas if we tax you on your income or one of your other things, when we know absolutely that you and everybody else has the money, that works equally well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So, nurses in England, Wales and Northern Ireland have rejected the UK government's proposed 3.6% pay offer, raising the risk of further disruption across NHS services as disputes continue into the summer. The Royal College of Nursing has completed an indicative vote of 345,000 members across the three nations. The results, expected this week, show a clear rejection of the pay award, which the union says does not reflect the rising cost of living or the increasing demands on the workforce. While no formal strike ballot will follow immediately, the RCN will ask ministers to enter talks on wider reforms to pay and conditions. This includes more financial support for student nurses and potential changes to Agenda for Change, the framework covering most non-medical NHS staff. Junior doctors in England are currently in the middle of a 5-day strike as they continue to call for a 29% pay rise. The GMB union, which represents ambulance workers and other NHS staff, has also rejected the 3.6% offer. NHS England leaders have warned that prolonged disputes may lead to further delays in treatment and affect patient care over the coming months. The offer was, the offer was made by the UK government and has been matched by the devolved governments in Cardiff and Belfast. In contrast, the Scottish Government has already reached multi-year agreements with health unions. In May, nurses in Scotland accepted an 8% pay deal over 2 years, giving a 4.25% increase this year and a 3.75% next year. Separate agreements have been made with doctors and other NHS staff in Scotland. William, funnily enough, I was actually talking to a colleague about this today, and he sounded annoyed about the doctors are going on strike, and it looks like nurses are going to go on strike as well. And I said, well, that's in England. And he was like, well, what's the difference? He didn't seem to understand that health is devolved and Scottish NHS is completely different to the English NHS. Do you think one of the problems here is that people don't realise that there is an actual difference, that it is devolved to Scotland?
That's often a problem, isn't it? What's devolved and what's reserved. In fact, not only is health devolved in Scotland, but the Scottish NHS has always been separate from the English NHS, and if I'm not mistaken, was probably founded slightly before it was, and certainly the seed for it was planted well before the English NHS. So yeah, explaining that to people is always a problem, and particularly when you've got the mainstream news media not making it clear. Although, to be fair to the BBC, they were definitely saying in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So maybe your friend should just listen slightly more, although I do acknowledge the overall problem. The English Health Service is struggling with pay across the board. We've got the resident, formerly the junior doctors, on day 4 of a 5-day strike. And they're wanting 29%, which they're not going to get, but it's the sort of thing that really needs some clever negotiation with some sort of multi-year deal that will get them back towards where they want to go. You've got the GMB, which includes ambulance crews, which has rejected 3.6%. And you've got the senior doctors who are going to consult on a 4% pay offer that they regard as an insult. And as you say, that's already all been sorted in Scotland. Not only, turning to nurses, was it accepted, I think, back in May, as you said, but in any event, nurses in Scotland are paid more right now. If you look at a Band 5, Band 6, Band 7 nurse, their lowest salary is some 3,000 above what's paid in England right now. Band 6, it's more like 5,000. Band 7, I believe it's getting on for 6,000. And the upper part of that spectrum in each case is also better in Scotland. So overall, Scotland does much better in looking after its health service staff. And that needs to be remembered, because we are always hearing from the English government and how about bad things are. We heard it about water last week, and I believe we may have heard it from Keir Starmer today when he was asked about John Swinney and independence, and he said, well, it should look better after, maybe the Scottish government should do its job properly and then they'd have a better health service. Well, sorry, in many respects, the Scottish government already does that and has been for quite a while. And that's something we need to be explaining to our friends, whether or not they think it's devolved, because that kind of propaganda needs to be unplugged rapidly, I would say.
Thank you, William, and thank you for picking up that we refer to junior doctors in the piece when it should have been resident doctors. They changed the name to reflect the fact that these are actually highly qualified people, not people that are still just starting out on their training. So thank you for that. So Thailand and Cambodia have agreed to an immediate and unconditional ceasefire following peace talks in Malaysia on Monday after border clashes displaced over 300,000 people and killed at least 35. Excuse me. The agreement was reached during emergency talks hosted by the Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim in his capacity as chair of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the ASEAN. Delegations from Thailand and Cambodia were joined by officials from the United States and China. Hostilities began last Thursday following a series of escalating incidents along the country's disputed border. Tensions were already high due to a long-standing territorial disagreement rooted in colonial-era maps. A deadly exchange of fire in May, which killed a Cambodian soldier, preceded last week's conflict that included artillery fire, airstrikes and a mutual recall of ambassadors. The ceasefire, excuse me, the ceasefire deal, forgive me, sorry about that, the ceasefire deal includes a plan for regional military commanders from both countries to meet on Tuesday morning, followed by a session of the Thai-Cambodian General Border Committee on the 4th of August. It also restores direct communication between the two governments at prime ministerial, foreign affairs and defence levels. The recent conflict has been further complicated by personal political disputes between prominent families in both nations. A leaked phone call between Paetongtarn Shinawatra, the suspended Thai Prime Minister, and former Cambodian leader Hun Sen highlighted the deterioration of relations. Their family ties to current leaders, Paetongtarn's father Thaksin Shinawatra and Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Manet, have contributed to the diplomatic fallout. Forgive my mispronunciation of those names there. The agreement comes days after former US President Donald Trump reportedly contacted both governments urging to end the fighting. Both countries face the potential of a 36% US trade tariff from the 1st of August if violence resumes. William, the sentence that leapt off the page at me there was the one that said tensions were already high due to the long-standing territorial disagreement rooted in colonial-era maps. So once again, it's colonialism and empires that are the cause of all this, although this time it was the French, I believe, in the 1900s. But do you think, will either of these two countries listen to Trump or pay any... Have they any reason to do what he asks of them?
Well, they might have one reason, and this kind of contradicts something I said earlier on, where I think much of the time Trump's negotiating style is tariffs, tariffs, tariffs. What a beautiful word! And to be honest, tariffs are very often America shooting itself in the foot to a certain extent. But that doesn't mean it always doesn't work, because a 36% tariff on Thailand and Cambodia when folk like Vietnam are on 20% might actually make a difference, because the US is Thailand's largest export market, 18.3% of exports, which are suddenly going to become a lot more expensive. And Cambodia, the figure is 37.9%. So, yes, in this case, I suspect, because America's, the imbalance in trade between the two is such that even if Cambodia and Thailand were to impose similar tariffs on the States in a sort of mutual assured destruction thing, it wouldn't be mutually assured destruction. It wouldn't have any effect. So it's possible in this case that the threat has worked. And because of that, Trump will always employ it in every situation, even ones where it doesn't work. But it's also true that Malaysia and the Southeast Asia Council have done a lot of work to try and just cool this down, because this is always going to be breaking out. This is a century-long dispute, and it is based in a very ill-defined border and all sorts of other wee niggles that have gone on for over 100 years. And it needs careful monitoring by probably people who have the genuine interests of both countries at heart. Trump just wants to get in, do his thing, and get his Nobel Peace Prize. Thank you very much. But those neighbours need stability in the region, and so it'll be down to them to make sure it happens. And yeah, however we do it, I think we just need to cool down all the trouble spots in the world, even the ones that have just flared up, because it's a particularly dangerous place at the moment. So this is a ceasefire that hopefully will stick, at least for a little while. Might not be easy, but for a little while, and will contribute to the general cooling down, I very much hope.
Thank you, William. And what about these high up, these two families that are high ranking families? Do you think they're deploying historical disputes to kind of gain power, or
It's quite possible. It's honestly, I am not a student of the politics of that area, but I know that it's complicated. And anything that has dynasties or families involved, even the US, is complicated. So that may well be a factor, but you know, you just hope that that kind of thing dies down over time. I guess that's the best I can say for it.
yeah, thank you, William. I suppose I had to remind myself that Thailand was Siam previously, and that Cambodia's not that long independent. So I suppose yeah, it's complicated. But so the Scottish government is developing a potential support package for bus manufacturer Alexander Dennis, aiming to bring new work to its Scottish sites following recent concerns about job losses. Discussions around the package are ongoing and remain commercially sensitive, with further due diligence required before any final decisions are made. The Scottish Government has confirmed that all options are being explored to protect jobs and retain manufacturing capacity within Scotland. First Minister John Swinney has asked Alexander Dennis to extend its consultation period while the viability of the proposals is assessed. He emphasised the government's commitment to retaining the firm's skilled workforce and its presence in Scotland. The initiative is being taken forward in partnership with Scottish Enterprise, Transport Scotland, the UK Government and trade unions. Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes is due to meet representatives from the Unite and GMB to provide an update on the plans. Meanwhile, Transport Secretary Fiona Hislop is attending the UK Bus Manufacturing Expert Panel in London, where discussions will focus on future demand for zero-emission buses. Alexander Dennis, which has facilities in Falkirk and Larbert, is the potential potential loss of jobs has raised concerns from unions and local leaders, prompting calls for government action. While full details of the proposed package have not been made public, ministers say that the government remains fully engaged to efforts to support the workforce and maintain bus production within Scotland. William, when I was digging into this, as it said in the piece, Dennis is based in Larbert. It's the largest bus and coach manufacturer in the UK, and they also make fire engines. They had 50% of the market share in 2019, not that long ago. And in 2022, Dennis announced it would expand its Larbert HQ by converting an on-site warehouse to bring in more manufacturing bus facilities. And then in June this year, they announced that everything's going to be suspended in Larbert, and they're going to shut down the factory in Falkirk, and everything's going to be moved to Scarborough. I mean, what happened?
I have no idea. But coming on the heels of Grangemouth and the 400 jobs endangered there, it's a problem for the area, and it's right that the Scottish government should be stepping in, and hopefully with Scottish Enterprise something can be worked out. It looks to me as if they're aiming to save roughly all 400 of the jobs at Alexander Dennis, and I hope that I think the consultation period is currently open until the 15th of August. And if they can extend it further just a bit to make this actually work, because we don't know what the details are, and it's probably commercially confidential. So we're not going to find out the details until it's all signed, sealed, and delivered. But it would be an important step for the area, because it's not just the 400 jobs at Alexander Dennis. There's the supply chain to think of as well. And there's at least one company that's folded, Greenfold Systems, I think, which was either in Falkirk or Larbert, not sure. But there will be other supply chain companies that are currently endangered. And what you don't want is a knock-on effect. So I think the Scottish Government has a relatively good record in this sort of thing when they're intervening. and they don't usually intervene unless they have some sort of solid plan and they've got something behind it. They don't always intervene very quickly, which gives their opponents time to throw stones at them, but I don't hear very much coming from their opponents to fix this situation. So I hope this all works out, and we shall just have to wait and see, I guess.
Okay, thank you, William. Next item is Professor Aisha Holloway has been appointed as Scotland's new Chief Nursing Officer and will take up the role in November following an external recruitment process led by the Civil Service Commissioner. Professor Holloway is currently Chair of Nursing Studies at the University of Edinburgh. She's Programme Director for the Nursing Now Challenge and an Adjunct Professor at Johns Hopkins School of Nursing. She also co-directs the Edinburgh Global Nursing Initiative and is a Fellow of both the Royal College of Nursing and the Royal College of Surgeons. The appointment comes after a competitive process and sees Professor Holloway succeed Anne Armstrong, who has been serving in the role on an interim basis, and she will return to her position as Deputy Chief Nursing Officer. With 3 decades of research experience in public health, workforce development and alcohol-related harm, Professor Holloway is expected to contribute to the Scottish Government's ongoing work to reform and improve the NHS. She has also held a range of advisory and executive roles both in the UK and internationally, including as a consultant to the World Health Organization and as a member of the State of the World's Nursing Steering Group Committee. Excuse me. As Chief Nursing Officer, she will take on professional responsibility for the nursing workforce in Scotland. The role includes providing leadership and advice on issues such as healthcare-associated infections, antimicrobial resistance and healthcare workforce planning. The Chief Nursing Officer Directorate also oversees policy input across midwifery, allied health professions and healthcare science. Health Secretary Neil Gray welcomed the appointment, highlighting her national and international experience as an asset to Scotland's healthcare ambitions. He also acknowledged the contributions of Anne Armstrong during her interim tenure. The Scottish Government said the appointment aligns with its commitment to strengthening health leadership and improving health outcomes across the country. William, I had a wee look at Professor Holloway's CV or biography before I came on air. It's absolutely stellar. If it was my CV, I think I'd be embarrassed and worried that people might think it was fake. Have you had a chance to look into this appointment, or what thoughts do you have on it?
Well, I mean, I saw the World Health Organization thing, and I saw the 30 years of experience, etc. And I'm sure it's perfectly genuine. I think she ticks all the right boxes, and so hopefully she'll be a good fit for the job, and she will be able to help with the considerable task, not just of the health service reform that the government's already working on, but improving the general state of health in Scotland, which must be one of the key tasks of the Chief Nursing Officer. And particular thing that stood out for me was her experience in dealing with alcohol-related harm, because that is a problem within Scotland, and general public health is certainly a big thing as well. So hopefully it is indeed a good appointment, and we'll see the benefits of it in the years to come.
An inspirational figurehead for any young person going into nursing in Scotland?
Well, presumably, yes.
Yeah.
She seems to, you know, you have to wait till, I don't know what she's like with inspiring young people, but, workforce, yes, all good. That was a
Okay.
terrible answer, wasn't it?
No, terrible question, probably. But anyway, thank you, William. Scientists at the University of Glasgow and the Cancer Research UK Scotland Institute have identified a key process in early stage breast cancer that could help prevent the disease from spreading elsewhere in the body. Published in the journal EMBO Reports, the research reveals that metabolic changes in immune cells occur before breast cancer spreads. By identifying these changes early, there may be an opportunity to stop the disease before it becomes more difficult to treat. The study was led by Dr. Cassie Clark, working with Professors Jim Norman and Karen Blythe. It focused on how breast cancer alters the metabolism of immune cells, causing them to release a molecule called uracil. This molecule enables This molecule enables distant organs to form a structure that supports secondary tumour growth. Researchers found that by blocking an enzyme called UPP1, responsible for producing uracil, they could prevent this structure from forming and help the immune system destroy cancer cells before they spread. The findings could lead to new methods for detecting early signs of cancer spread through blood tests and the development of drugs to block UPP1. The approach was shown to reduce the formation of secondary tumours and improve immune responses in mice. Each year, around 56,800 people in the UK are diagnosed with breast cancer, and approximately 11,300 die from it. While breast cancer treatments have improved, the disease becomes much harder to manage once it spreads. Researchers say understanding how and why metastases occur is crucial to developing more effective therapies. The study received funding from Cancer Research UK, from the Wellcome Trust, the Medical Research Council, Breast Cancer Now and Pancreatic Cancer UK. Further research is underway to explore how UPP1 affects immune cells and whether drugs targeting immune cell metabolism can prevent breast cancer from spreading or even developing. William, I'm sure you know that we like to try and end on a Scottish good news story, but this, I think, transcends the borders of Scotland, because wherever you live in the world, if you have breast cancer, or if you've got a loved one who's been diagnosed with breast cancer, the last words you want to hear is it's spread, and this seems to show that we might be able to stop that.
You might well be able to stop that, and it's very interesting that the mechanism with this metabolite, where it basically does it fool the immune system into not trying to destroy it? So we're intervening in that process to stop it spreading. If this works, I mean, we still need to develop drugs that will make that happen. And the key thing here is we're only talking about metastasis. You're still potentially, you need to be sure that your cancer, if you get it, is diagnosed early. Now, I'm not saying I do this in my own life, but if you have something that needs checked, get it checked, because one of the things where it spreads is when this sort of intervention hasn't had the chance to take place because you've got to it too late. So I would simply say, everybody, look after yourselves, look for things that are not right, and get them seen to early on, and then you'll get the benefit of advances like this.
Yeah, thank you, William. And yeah, you're right. If you have testicles, then check them out regularly as well. But that's it for this evening, Scotland at 7. Thank you to our guest, William Duguid, once again for giving up part of your week. Thank you, William.
Thank you. It's been fun.
We need to get out more, don't we? If that's fun.
So, definitely.
Before I go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. We can only exist with your support. Our programmes will always be free to view, you know that, but if you can afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, or please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you, and once again, thank you to William Duguid, and thank you to you at home for watching. Good night.